Hi, it's Michael Kerr here, presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, I interview a fellow small business owner or an expert, and they share their stories, their lived experiences, the wins and the losses, and their best advice to help you, the listener, get the most you can from your own business. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. And thanks also to Kerr Capital, supporters of the show. Welcome into another edition of Small Business Banter Community Radio and Podcast. Geoff Hetherington is with me today. Welcome in, Geoff.
G'day, Michael. Thank you for having me.
This is second time. You were in November last year, and we chatted about the great work you do as a business coach on getting your business to work for you better and leading to maybe an exit of the business owner from the business. But today we caught up on the Central Coast of New South Wales last year. Had a coffee. You talked about this concept of retirement in installments, which we both agreed at the time was pretty cool, and we wanted to flesh that out a little bit today. So, do you just want to recap on very briefly on the work you do, and then we'll rip into this and uncover what you can do to kind of contemplate a retirement in installments?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I'm actually more of a business teacher than a coach, but if I say I'm a coach, people think I work for a vocational college and I'm a failed tradie. So I teach people more about business than I coach them, although coaching and mentoring is part of it.
Yeah.
The big thing I do is I run people through a process. It's got three levels. The first level is detangle, where we get people very, very clear on where they've come from, where they are, where they want to get to, and what areas of their business needs most urgent work on, and revenue is always one of those ones. When we get that sorted, we then look at designing their business so it sits around the outside of their life instead of their life being around their business. I'm a great believer in what I call work-life separation. I used to preach work-life integration because I hate work-life balance, because I think that's BS. But work-life separation to me is more important, particularly in tune with this idea of taking your retirement in installments. And then the last thing I do with people is I help them dominate their marketplace and put together an exit strategy. Now, whether they intend on leaving or selling their business or not, the exercise of going through and saying, I'm going to sell the business in 3 months makes it incredibly more efficient and effective. So that's essentially what I do.
Yeah. That's great. So we did chat over coffee, retirement installments. Do you want to just give us the 1 or 2 minute story on how that came about? Because I was totally captivated, because what I do think there are new models emerging for business owners, and there's, we could talk for days about some of the reasons for it, for them, but it doesn't have to be binary, as in I run and I run and my business dominates my life, and it doesn't necessarily have to be I run it then I sell it. So somewhere in between. So talk about the retirement installments, where you got that story from.
The genesis of it is really from a mate of my dad's, who really what he did was he would go out, earn money and decide that was enough for 6 to 12 months and then go off and spend the 6 to 12 months and start looking for it again. And the practical example I got was when I was a teenager. I worked in my local milk bar, and I worked for a family called the Pomeroys, which was Ma and Pa Pomeroy and their daughter and son-in-law. And I got to know them really quite well. And Stuart Pomeroy, the older, although old, he's much younger than I am now. I think he was probably...
So you're reframing that
I'm trying to reframe that just a bit. But what he said to me was they would go in and they'd buy a milk bar and they would work virtually 7 days a week for 2 years, bank as much money, and then they go and have anywhere from 2 to 3 years off before they bought their next milk bar. And this idea of, he said, I want to go and travel the world. I want to take my retirement in installments. So that's where this idea really came from, was, there's a linear sort of setup that we're taught all the way from primary school, society type thing, go to high school. If you're lucky, go to uni, but whatever, high school, get a job, work for 40 years, retire, happy days. Whereas I like the idea of this going out, using my skills, earning enough money, and then having a couple of years off, kicking around while I'm young enough to enjoy it, and then going back and doing some more work just to build up money and do it again and again. And so the idea very much appeals to me, and it appeals to a lot more people these days, I find, this idea of taking retirement in installments, because it could be a risky thing, but more and more people, I think, are willing to entertain that risk, because I think, quite frankly, more and more people are aware of the fact that, waking up tomorrow is really not a given. We don't know what's going to happen. So this idea of saving everything up for the glorious days when we have big superannuation or all our money, and then we go, that doesn't work for a lot of people. I mean, with my my in-laws, they worked very, very hard. It was a second marriage for both of them. He was a painter. He had lots of hearing problems from a child. She was a hairdresser who opened her own bridal salon, etc. But they worked really, really hard together with this idea that when they retired, they were going to be doing 2 or 3 cruises a year. And what happened 12 months before they retired, he was diagnosed with stage 4 Alzheimer's, and then she caught a whole lot of lung and cancer issues. So now they're both in an old folks' home. So they didn't get to go do what they were doing. So that just reinforces this idea of maybe we should all be looking at taking our retirement in installments while we can enjoy it.
Look, and the opportunities are there. We're going to talk about how you might kind of find the right model to facilitate that. But also, there's a lot of drivers, and in COVID has taught us to rethink the way we do business, and I think there's remote work, and there's the portfolio lifestyle. There's a whole lot of factors that have fed into this idea that I can do it different. It's not linear. One of the things I know that you kind of talk about a lot in your teachings is a fundamental question to start. So we will get into your take on how you might facilitate owning a business, but being able to take some time out of it and come back to it, or as you pointed out with that that retail business, buy one, do it up, sell it, come back a year later and buy another one. So either way, it's about it's a fundamental question that I ask all my clients, and it's deceptively simple, which is how much is enough? And we look at answering that question across a number of areas. So obviously money is one. How much is enough money? But how much is enough travel, enough meals out, enough concerts seen, enough weeks lying beside a pool? We decide on a number of areas, but you ask that. And I get my clients to revisit that probably twice a year to look at, because things do change. And quite frankly, your answers to that question at age 30 are going to be very different to the answers at age 40. So it's something you got to keep asking. The same question. I think it was one of the great philosophers or academics said, you need to keep asking the question because the answers keep changing. I can't whether it's Albert Einstein or whoever it was, but
Hamas or Einstein, one of them. But the thing is, I say where we are in our life affects our answers to so many questions we should be asking ourselves. But for me, the fundamental one is how much is enough? And quite frankly, I've started to ask some of my clients the flip one: how much is too much? Right? How much is too much? I mean, maybe they're working for money and they need to stop and go, I actually don't need that much money, or I don't need to buy into the hustle and grind culture that so many of the Americans are pushing these days. That's not needed. We see that 10x a lot, don't we, on all over the place? And and I mean, no thanks.
Maybe 3x or maybe 2x or 1.5x.
2x is good, because I'm sure there's always rooms we can improve it. One of the things I find working with my clients is it's a question of there's stuff they don't know, but once they know it, they can easily 2x the performance of their business and also their private lives. I say that buys very much into this idea of mine of work-life separation, which of course supports the idea of taking retirement in instalments. Because, we're all taught about, oh, look, we should have work-life balance. Well, work-life balance presupposes 50-50. Anyone who works, especially in their own business, knows there's only so many hours in the day and so much energy, and you put it where it's needed, and 9 times out of 10 it's in your business. So it's out of whack anyway. I used to talk to people about maybe integrating the two more closely, but I think that's wrong because what happens is the business still seems to take over. So now I'm working very hard with my clients on work-life separation so that we set up clear boundaries for them to actually stop work at 6 o'clock at night, all right? And when they finish work, they write a list of no more than 5 things they'll have done by 5 o'clock the next night. So at 5 o'clock the next night, they put a line, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the key thing, is to separate work and life and then design the work side so it gives you the ability to start taking your life or retirement in instalments.
Yeah, we're going to, like in the back half of this interview, I want to talk to you about some of your practical ways to help with that. But in getting to what is enough or what's too much, can be a challenging conversation. Does it extend to the business owner and the business owner's nearest and dearest? Like, how do you get to decide on something like that? So
it depends. So if it's a business owner situation we're talking about, and it may be, there's a business owner and his spouse has nothing to do with the business, or it might be spouses working together.
Operationally,
No matter what it is, you can't answer that question, how much is enough, without talking to your spouse if you've got one. All right. So I say to people, buy a bottle of your favourite red wine or your bubbly and map out a Sunday afternoon and sit down and go through these questions. I've got a document on it. Go through these questions and talk about it and come to an understanding or an agreement on what you're going to aim for from these things. And then when you know those things, then we'll work towards using your business to achieve them.
Yeah.
So far too often people set personal goals and business goals and the two don't meet up. Because ideally what should happen is you should know your personal and professional goals, and then you should be designing your business goals to support them. So it should be a cascade from your personal and professional goals down to your business goals, down to how your key performance indicators, let's call it that, down to the operations. That should be the cascade or the waterfall. But too often what happens is you've got your personal stuff here and you've got your business here, and they don't mesh up. But your business should support the lifestyle you want.
But we both know very well that being a business owner can be all-encompassing, and this communication outside with a mentor, an educator, a trusted friend who's been in business is so important. But this is also one of those more fundamental questions of that the business does support, small business does support families, and so whether a partner is or isn't involved in the operations day to day, there's a case to say that the time the owner spends in there and the money they draw out of it directly affects. So it's a really great case no doubt can be difficult to get that conversation going. So what we might start to do is just talk about some ways to start to put this idea of a retirement in instalments. And you can define, if you're listening, you can define retirement in instalments in many different ways. But what Geoff and I are trying to say is that you don't have to be at your office or your workplace 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for ad infinitum. So, and on today's edition of Small Business Banter Community Radio and Podcast, Geoff Hetherington, business educator from Elite Business Institute. Let's start with, there's an owner or owners and family members listening in, and they've decided that we've got a bit of a sense of that we'd like to change things up, and they've got an idea of what enough is, and it might, let's call it 2 3/4x rather than 10x.
Yep.
What's the next step? Strategy, and as contrasted with just tactics. So I know you've written and talked about this widely. What's a strategy? How do you go about getting one to support your lifestyle?
A strategy is the overall direction you want to take the business in to achieve a measurable or an agreed outcome. All right. So that's the high level stuff. The tactics is the things you actually do to get there. The tactics are the things that support the strategy. And people confuse the two. They sit down and write down 6 goals and they go, well, that's a strategy. It's part of a strategy. It's not the whole thing. Or people go, well, I'm going to raise my prices, so that's a good strategy, but it's a tactical execution. So the key thing is you need to ask yourself how much is enough and understand what that number is. So let's just talk about money. Money really means nothing more than choice. The more money you've got, the more choices you can make for yourself and your family and your lifestyle. And there is, and you need to decide how much is enough to make those choices that you want to make. Well, let's say you've decided that. Well, then that becomes a figure. So the next thing is you've got to decide, when do I want to be earning that money, or when do I want to have that money in the bank? Now, I work with my clients and we set 12-month and then 3-year outcomes. We don't do 5 years anymore. We don't do 10 years. That's just ridiculous in current circumstance. So we look at 12 months and 3 years and how to do that. So, so we might say in 3 years, which is 12 quarters, we're going to have X money in the bank. Great. So what are we going? Then we work backwards. So what are we going to do in each of those 12 quarters to actually achieve that money? So if we start next quarter, March quarter this year, 2023, what's the first thing we need to be doing to start bringing that final amount of money closer? And usually it's raise your prices, because most people charge too little, etc. Right?
Yeah, and one of the things I often see when owners come to me, they're ready to start to think about selling their business, and it's and it's their business, and they present a set of financials, and it's one line being revenue and a whole lot of expenses, and then when you start to unpick what that revenue is made of. It's deeply fascinating, because the owner looks at it as their business, and I look at it and go, well, there's like 3 or 4 different types of businesses in here. You do some retail, you do some wholesale, you do some contracting or something, and and I think that's one of the more fundamental, strategic questions. What not to be too esoteric, but what business am I in? And so from there, you don't have a lump of revenue. You have 4 business units, and one of the first decision points is, if I was wanting to scale back, uncomplicated, detangle it in your terminology, then you might just, there might be a case to do away with retail, for example, or the wholesale bit. So is that another example of a kind of fundamental strategic?
It's really about clarity. I mean, the first thing I try and help my clients do is stop defining themselves by the work they do. How often do you go to a barbecue and you say to someone, as we all do, Aussies, we go, so what do you do? And they go, I'm an accountant, right? So they put themselves in the box, I'm an accountant, or I'm a sparky, or I'm a teacher. They define themselves by the work they do. And I try and say, well, define yourself outside that. If you stop work tomorrow, who would you be? And that's a really challenging thing to do. And a lot of people don't do it, but it's still something I ask them to consider. The other thing is I get them to look at revenue concentration, right? Lots and lots of small businesses, 70% of their income comes from a single client. And so you go to sell the business, the first thing someone who's used to business risk looks at and goes, I'm not going to buy your business, because you lose that one client, there's no business. There's no company. There's nothing there. So we also work on identifying revenue concentration and getting it down to, say, 12% or 15% from where it is to try and make it done. I mean, you can go to the ATO and you can get benchmarks for all sorts of different industries in terms of revenue and things. And I'd hasten to say benchmarks is just the average, and you want your business to be above average. So you don't pat yourself on the back if you're doing 16% like everyone else in your industry is. You want to be doing 18 or 20%, depending on what the measure is, of course. But there's key things. So, how much is enough? It will give you clarity of goals across a number of areas, but for business, it's primarily that. Who am I? How do I define myself if I had to stop work tomorrow is a challenging and key question people need to think about. But the people who get clear on that are the people who actually seem to be able to organise retirement in installments easier than people who don't. And then revenue concentration is something you've got to look at, because if you want to sell your business, you can't have too much revenue coming from one or two sources. It's got to be well spread.
Yeah, which interesting, and like in the context of not selling the business and holding it. One of the ways I see retirement in installments working is for an existing owner, don't feel like the choice is to stay in 24/7 or sell. So, but you got to pose the questions: how could I ultimately leave the business for 6 weeks, a month, whatever it is, come back and so. Maybe there's a case for, different businesses with different attributes that are focused on one client, which you could manage very closely and say, look, I'm out of here. I mean, so we're posing questions.
Though, Michael, that you can use with that stuff, right? I refer to as putting your business on cruise control. If you're going to own a business, you've still got to have some say in the direction of it and all that sort of stuff. But if you put it on cruise control, it's like in a car. There's less you have to worry about. You still look after direction. There's less to worry about. So most business owners, say small business owners, let's take those, they start their business because A, they don't want a job, they don't want to work for someone else. B, they've got a skill set that people pay them for and they think they're pretty good at. All right, so they do that. And they've got to transition, as Gerber says in the E-Myth, whatever edition's currently out there. That's called a technician. They've got to jump from technician to managing a business, and that's a big jump for a lot of people, and they can't make it. So that's step one. But step two is when you're the manager, you need to understand there's two hats that you're wearing. One is the creator. In other words, you're creating stuff for the business, and the other one is the implementer. You're implementing the things that bring dollars in through the door. So smart business owners decide which hat fits best, and usually it's the creator hat. So then they've got to go and find that implementer. Or they've got to systemize their business enough so that implementation is going to happen on cruise control. And it's the businesses that do that are then able to go, gee, I had 8 weeks off and I came back and the staff told me to go away again because business has never been so good, right? That's the end result you want. So, and how long you have off. Now, the milk bar thing is they used to work like Billio for 2 years, then they had 18. Maybe you don't want that. For me, I wouldn't want that because I actually quite enjoy working, but I'd be quite happy to go on a 6-week cruise and come back and get back in it,
But in that case, the milk bar owners, that's part of what we're trying to say is that it's what you want to do and how a business can serve you. We can define it however we want that works for us, but one way or another, the business is able to fund enough of what we need to give us time and money.
How much is enough? Yeah. So how much is enough money for me to take the next 18 months off and travel the world? Well, great. There's a pretty clear goal and outcome. So now what you do is you figure out the strategy to get there and the tactics to implement the strategy. That's what you do. How much is enough so I can have 8 weeks or 12 weeks a year off, and have 4 weeks every quarter or whatever it happens to be. These are the fundamental questions you need to ask yourself and get answers to before you can start thinking about retirement in installments.
And we're encouraging people to ask themselves those questions and start to do something, with a third party, whoever it might be, it's trusted. So, Geoff, in terms of one of the things, I do, and I encourage listeners to, and we'll put in the show notes, Geoff posts some great practical stuff on a weekly basis, and I really do enjoy reading it.
Thank you.
Lastly, your pre-flight checklist, which I think that's your brand. But what it said to me is there's a bunch of things you need to do every day. Once you've decided which direction you're heading in, these are the things to do or not to do. Can you just quickly go through the way to think about a day in the life for an owner?
All right. As human beings, there's two things we need to get hold of and achieve every day. But one is, a sense of achievement, and the other one is to have some fun, a few laughs on the way. And too often as a small business owner or a business owner or even an executive, you finish the day and you go, I'm really tired, I've worked really hard, but I don't feel like I've accomplished anything. So I use a thing with my clients called the 5x5. And what we do is we start off on a Sunday, and what we do is we do a quick review of the previous week. So this is like 30 minutes to 45 minutes with a good glass of red or a cup of coffee, whatever it is, in your hand. And you look at last week and you go, what was good, what was bad, what was ugly, so I know never to do it again last week. Great. What things are major things I need to get done this week, and what day will I put them on? So that gives you some shape and form for the coming week. And then you go, what are the 5 things I'll have done by 5 o'clock Monday night? And that list of 5 shouldn't be change the world, write a book or anything. It should be a mix of large and small things, and probably personal and business. So it might be Monday I'm going to go for a half-hour walk. I'll pick up the dry cleaning. I'll write that
sales letter,
whatever it is. And then 5 o'clock you sit down and you go, I've done those 5 things, sense of accomplishment, psychologically I feel great. Then you do a brain dump of all the stuff that you need to get done tomorrow, and you pick the 5 you'll have done by 5 o'clock come hell or high water. You write them down. And what happens psychologically is our subconscious lets go. You know, you lie there at 3 o'clock in the morning with worry.
Yeah.
When you do the 5 by 5, that stops happening because your subconscious knows there's shape and form to the next day. It stops worrying about things. And the fact on a Sunday you sort of allocated certain things to certain days also shuts up your subconscious because it knows there's shape and form to the day.
And they're non-negotiables. I think that's also critically important. Yeah. Look, unfortunately, we will put a link to some of those because they're so, you know, we've talked about the idea you can do things differently, but you gotta be accountable to yourself day to day. So, Geoff Hetherington, business educator from Elite Business Institute. Thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. Take care.
So that is all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. I continue to be inspired bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. If you want to listen to any past episode, jump onto your podcast platform of choice and search Small Business Banter. There you will find a diverse and fascinating collection of small business owners and experts openly discussing and sharing their experiences. For any of the links, resources or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact me, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And it would be great to have you tune in the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.